All right, well, we still have people joining the webinar. I can see the numbers increasing all the time, but we will go ahead and get started. So good morning and welcome to our webinar titled Building an Azure Data Platform to Drive Performance in Air Traffic Management. We've got people joining us from all over the world this morning, which is really exciting. My name's Chris Kearns and I am the UK Regional Manager for Altis Consulting UK, and I'm going to be your host today. I'm very pleased to be joined by Emma Hawksworth, the Business Insights Lead for Air Navigation Solutions, as well as Roger Light, Managing Consultant for Altis Consulting UK. We're really keen to keep this webinar as engaging as possible today. So please do feel free to comment in the chat window. And if you have any questions throughout, please post them in the Q&A panel available from the Zoom control panel. We'll either answer those questions throughout the webinar or we'll get to them at the Q&A in the end. Before I hand over to Emma, I would just like to briefly introduce Altis Consulting, who we are and what it is that we do. So we've been around since 1998. In fact, I was lucky enough to be the first person hired by Altis back in 1998. We're about 115 staff now, and we're headquartered out of Sydney, but we've had an office here in the UK for about the last 8 years. I moved over about 2 years ago to run our UK business. So we've got 3 offices in Australia and also 1 in New Zealand. We are data and analytics specialists. That's all we do. And that's all we've been doing for 22 years. We're vendor independent. And what that means is that we do not sell any software. In terms of what it is that we do and how we can help you, you'll see over on the right-hand side that our focus is on delivering business outcomes. And we do that through 3 different streams of work. The first is advisory. And here we're helping our customers chart a path to where they want to be in the future in terms of data and analytics, whether that's setting up a roadmap to guide them in their future direction, whether it's helping them understand where they are today through a maturity assessment, helping them choose platforms and tool sets because we are vendor independent, or helping them chart their future from a data governance perspective through a data governance framework. So that's our advisory stream of services. Next up is our delivery stream of services. And it's here where we're designing, building, and delivering things like data platforms, which we're going to talk about today, data lakes, data warehouses, visualizing the output of those core data sets through data visualization platforms, delivering data governance, and managing programs of work. So that's our second stream of work. Our third is our managed services team. And some of our clients like to support and maintain their own solutions, but if they don't, then we have our managed services team that are there to proactively support and maintain those solutions. And as I said, all of those 3 streams of work are keenly focused on delivering business outcomes for you. Underpinning all of that are our best practice frameworks that we've been iterating and developing over the last 22 years. We bring a lot of our experience and insight to bear when transferring knowledge to you and providing skills uplift for your team, and supported by our ethos of connecting with courage, heart, and insight, which I'm going to talk about now. So our ethos of connecting with courage, heart, and insight is all about our commitment to building trusted relationships with you and share in the responsibility of delivering your outcomes. So we put an awful lot of effort into developing our staff's soft skills to be able to build those relationships with you. It's a very important part of what we do. Now, I mentioned that we're vendor agnostic. We don't sell any software, but we do partner with all the major players in the data and analytics space. That gives us access to their software and training, et cetera, and allows us to stay up to date to be able to best deliver for you. That's enough for me. Here's my contact details. I'm also going to be sending you an email after the webinar with a link to the recording. So you've got my contact details, and I certainly welcome any conversations with any of you around what you're doing in the data analytics space and to see if there might be an opportunity for us to assist with you. In terms of the agenda today, Emma's going to get us kicked off and set the context. She's going to talk about the challenges that air navigation solutions were facing in trying to wrangle their data to be able to support their business decision making. Roger's going to describe the solution we've built and the approach that we took before handing back to Emma, who's going to demonstrate the Power BI reports that she's built that point at the Azure Data Platform that we've built for her, before then wrapping up with the benefits that ANS have been able to realise so far. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Emma Hawksworth.
Great, thank you, Chris, for that. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us to discuss data within air traffic management, some of the challenges with this data, as Chris mentioned, the solution that's been provided by Altis, the benefits that ANS have seen as a result of that, and also how some of this can benefit you. But before I go into that, I'll talk to you a little bit about me. So I'm Emma Hawksworth. I'm the Business Insights Lead with Air Navigation Solutions. And at ANS, we provide air traffic management services. So this encompasses a few different areas. The side that you're probably most familiar with is the air traffic control up in the tower. So it's that tall building you'll see in the middle of the airfield where the controllers sit at the top, overlooking the airfield and managing the aircraft around the taxiways, on the stand and on the runway. So you can see here actually the visual control room at the top of the tower at Gatwick Airport. It's very much like the scene that you'll be familiar with from films, where you see the guy at the top of the tower, the aircraft requesting the flyby, doesn't get it allowed, goes past anyway, the guy spills coffee down him and the aircraft goes past the window. It's very much like that, but with less of the flybys. So that's one angle of air traffic management. The other side is the approach services. That's also known as radar. Here we can see Gatwick, Edinburgh Airport, with the radar screen that the controllers manage. So this is the airspace around the airport. So once the aircraft's taken off, if we're talking about departures, for example, the aircraft takes off along the runway and then is handed over from the tower team over to the radar team, who manage the next stage of the journey up to 40 nautical miles or so, using the case of Edinburgh. The aircraft is then handed over to other aircraft controllers as it goes through its journey. So it will talk to a number of different air traffic controllers as it progresses through different pieces of airspace. Now, to keep all of this running 24/7, 7 days a week, there is a lot of equipment that sits behind this. And that's very much, sorry, a bit carried away there. That also features in the air traffic management space. We have a team of engineers who are supporting and maintaining all of this equipment all of the time. The example you can see there on the screen is the instrument landing system, which guides planes onto the runway, enabling them to land successfully. There are also a number of support services at ANS that contribute to the overall operation, so safety, security and quality, the use of simulators and simulation experts within air traffic control, operations and airspace experts, so looking at the routes that are flown in the airspace, and a project management office looking at asset replacement projects, for example, as equipment needs updating. All of that helps to drive an innovative approach in air traffic management, and my area in Business Insights very much supports that. So I'm working with the data from all of these different systems and more to drive performance in air traffic management, which brings me into the next section to talk more around the data that I'm working with and some of the business context about why we engage with Altis. So firstly, the data. What is it that I'm working with and getting my hands on? What challenges have come through with that? And why did we take the decision to partner to help to combat this? Then once we knew we were going to outsource this, how we then got approval from the business and how we were able to kickstart this project and ensure its success. So firstly, the data. There are vast amounts of data in air traffic control coming from all sorts of different source systems. So the air traffic control equipment, for example, such as the radar screen I showed you earlier, from stakeholders such as the airport or airlines, and from other third parties such as weather providers, for example. Now at ANS, looking at our data and what we wanted to do with it, we started by focusing on the operational information, and more specifically, the flight movement information from our EFPS system. EFPS stands for Electronic Flight Progress Strips, and this is what the controllers in the tower use to manage the aircraft as it moves through the different stages. Interestingly, it did actually used to be paper strips that would be annotated by the controllers and physically moved around depending on where the aircraft was in its journey. Fortunately for me, and probably for the controllers, that's now digitalized, but the concept is still very much the same. And so in terms of what that actually looks like, if you think about when you're going on holiday, either you might have one planned or previously, you spend a couple of hours in the airport, first of all, you get to the gate and you're finally boarding the aircraft. You hear the pilot speaking to you. While he's doing that, he's probably also liaising with the air traffic controller, requesting pushback and engine start. So you'll then start moving backwards and start taxiing around the airfield. You will probably come to a stop for a short while. You'll look out the window and realise that you're part of a queue of other aircraft who are all waiting to take off, which is frustrating. At that point, you'll move forward through the queue, eventually turn the corner, line up on the runway, and you'll be off on your journey. The same applies at the other end. So as you approach your destination, they will have an expected time of arrival for your flight. You'll then land, taxi to stand, and then be on stand. Each of these date timestamps are captured, enabling analytics to be carried out to understand the different stages of the journey and how that compares with either the typical or other extremes to understand if that's optimal. So from an analytical perspective, all of this data is great and it's really, really useful to get stuck into and is exciting to work with. But it can come with a few challenges, even if you have a clear vision of where you want to go with it. And that was very much the situation at ANS. So we had a clear vision and clear requirements of what we wanted to do. We knew the value that data can bring and where we want to go with it. And that's twofold. So one angle is the internal benefits. We know that it can benefit us as a business, but also wider than that. So we want to help others with their data as well. So if we could build an infrastructure, not just for ourselves, but for the benefits of others, that any data could be added to, we can really start to harness some incredible value. And I would say that's a key takeaway for yourselves, is to have a clear understanding of the requirements. Whether you're entering into a project like this or something similar, it definitely helps to smooth the process. So we have all this data. It's coming from different sources. It's coming across in different formats. It's owned by different entities and it's updated, extracted at different intervals. And some of the data is on a closed infrastructure. Now, this is one of the things I learned in joining air traffic control, is that some of the systems are air-gapped. So they're not connected to the internet or many other systems. So it's very hard to automate the connection there. That requires, therefore, a lot of manual intervention to load this in two different perspectives. So to join all of this data together, you'll need a unique key or some sort of identifier to connect it. That's not always provided in each of the data sets, so it can take quite a while to create that data key in each set to join it together. But similarly, the volumes of data when you're loading it, that can take an awfully long time when you're working with it. My colleague set me up with a second remote desktop so I could get the data loading on one screen that could kind of whir away in the background while I then carried on working on my other screen, which was a huge help, but isn't particularly effective still. Now, I don't know if this is sounding familiar to any of you out there, or if you've had any of the same challenges, perhaps. Put a yes or a no in the comments if you would. I'd be really interested to see if you've come across similar challenges or other challenges. So this is definitely one perspective where it was limiting my time, but it covered more than that. It also limits what we can do with the data. So I've got an example of a dashboard I was working on there, showing the breakdown of journey times, so very much tying in with the breakdown I showed you earlier. I've got data going back a number of years, but when importing the data into Power BI using the import mode, it can only hold a certain amount. So I'm limited to only analyze the data from summer 2018 onwards, which is really limiting. Similarly, I can't always put all of the information in one report because there's so much of it. So sometimes that can lead to duplication of data. Other times it can mean that I can't put everything in one report to compare and contrast it at the same time. So here, looking at the departure journey times, I've got it broken down by the runway in use, but there are other metrics that I could use to break down this data that aren't available to me, which is really limiting. The same applies to the business. They therefore can't see all of this really interesting, useful, actionable content. Sometimes they're limited to only seeing some of the raw data. Really interestingly, actually, earlier on this year, Henry, our managing director, came up to me and said he'd been up in the control tower on the 9th floor, which has a great view, looking over the airfield. And in one particular corner, he could see the aircraft starting to queue up, not being able to get on stand. Meanwhile, the stands were full with departing aircraft that were due to depart. So there was a corner of congestion starting to build up, which is never a good thing from an air traffic perspective. So he asked me to take a look into it, see if we could understand what caused this, what was the root cause of this. Now, that took me nearly a day to pull together. I already had a lot of the information in Power BI, but because of the manipulations and the transformations that required, it took me a significant amount of time to pull together and to dig through the information, which is really not an efficient use of my time or particularly helpful for Henry, who will be really interested to learn from this so that we don't see it happen again. So we knew that there was a problem to be solved here, and there are a few different ways of going about it, but for us, we chose to partner. And I'll tell you why we did that. So we didn't have anything in place at the beginning. As I mentioned, we were building an infrastructure from scratch, and we wanted to build it right. We knew it was critical that we had strong foundations in place, but we didn't have the skills to build that, nor the time to develop these skills. So for me, I'm trying to build and deliver content and grow the function. I don't have time then to create a data warehouse in addition. Alongside that, for ANS, it's important for us to partner. We don't want to create a huge organization with a whole IT infrastructure team, for example. We want to bring together the right specialities through partnering for the benefits of our customers. And this is a really good example of how this has worked really well for us. And so in terms of the benefits that we were looking for and have found, we wanted someone who understands where ANS are on our journey, where we want to go, and how this project fits in with that. We wanted someone we could build a long-term relationship with, who would deliver a quality product and service to the same level that we would expect someone internal to deliver. And doing that reduces the risk involved in the project because we were working with specialists, and enabled us to reap the benefits much earlier on. Similarly, we wanted that flexibility in the relationship. As I mentioned, I didn't have the time to devote to this permanently 5 days a week. I was looking for a part-time delivery model that would fit with my other requirements. And we didn't need the complete package. So I was already creating reports in Power BI, and that was something we wanted to maintain, but we needed everything that would lead up to that. So that balance and that fit with what we were already providing was important to us. So we have our data. We know that we've got some challenges with it, and we know we'd like to find a partner to help us solve these. So then we come on to the business case. So one of the benefits, certainly from my perspective, was that the senior leadership team were already very bought in on this. They saw the benefit of data and having it stored and managed effectively. But I would say one of the other positives for me in this process was having an effective project sponsor. And I would put that to all of you if you're looking to engage in a project like this, is that it's critical to have an effective project sponsor who can kind of take your plan to the senior levels and fight your corner if you're facing any opposition. So pop a note in any of the comments if you've found this beneficial, if you've run a project and you've had an effective project sponsor. I'd like to hear from you. Or on the flip side, actually, if you've tried to implement a project and you've had pushback at a senior level and that you've not had a project sponsor to help you fight that, I'd be interested to hear. although we had all of this, we didn't know what level of an investment this would be, both from a time and a cost perspective. So it was a learning process for us. We engaged with the market to understand what the optimal solution would be based on our existing technology, what the timeframes would be, and the expected costings, and similarly to get a feel for the company that we want to partner with. That really helped us to choose our preferred supplier, which is Altis, if you hadn't guessed. And then I could put the case forward internally, which meant we had a really easy sign off, and then we could progress this project across both units, Edinburgh and Gatwick. And it was the Gatwick EFPS system that was the first data source that we integrated. So having given some of this background of data and ATC, the challenges that I faced with it, and how we've taken steps to remedy this, I'll now hand you over to Roger, who will run through some of the more technical aspects of the solution.
Thanks, Emma. I'm Roger, I'm an Altis consultant, and I was responsible for implementing the project from the Altis side. So we've learned about the situation with lots of data challenges and how to bring all of that data together. And now we're going to look at the solution that we created. So our title this morning, Building an Azure Data Platform to Drive Performance in Air Traffic Management. I want to look at the data platform part of that first and define what we mean by data platform. Then I'll take a look at the high-level design of what we built and how it works. And then we'll also look at the shared approach to project delivery that Altis and ANS adopted. So first of all, what is a data platform? There are lots of different definitions of data platforms, and you can see some of the words that we have in the list at the top. And these are all good, sensible terms. They have overlapping meanings and usage. Some of them speak to particular ways of storing or processing data. And one of the things that we like about the term data platform is that it's generic. It doesn't require a particular solution for storage or a particular method of implementation for processing data. In fact, we define really a data platform by its goal to centralize data in an intuitive structure to support valuable reporting and analysis. So that's what we're trying to achieve, but how does it do that? Well, in essence, it does three things for us. First, it fetches the data and connecting to a source system and bringing it to a central location. Second, it organizes the data. So applying any business rules that we need and cleansing the data, dealing with missing or invalid values. And then finally, it presents the data, providing a platform for people to report from using many different reporting tools. So here's an overview of the technical solution that we created, and there are 4 pillars here, which I will go through in turn. First of all, we have the data sources, the pre-existing data that needs to be arranged in the data platform. Then the data integration piece, which is, if you like, where the nuts and bolts of the data platform live. The reporting area, which to a degree already existed. As you've heard, Emma had already done a lot of work specifically with Power BI to present reports to the business. So something that we wanted to make use of as we moved forward. And finally, we have our consumers, both internal within ANS and external, who are eagerly awaiting their reports. So a slightly closer look at the data sources. The main data source for this project was the EFPS system for Gatwick, so the electronic flight progress strips that Emma talked about with the different movement times of a flight as it progresses either to or from the stand. We've also got some general aviation data. There are a number of different standards in aviation, a number of different international bodies that create codes and descriptions that are used throughout the industry. Two such are the International Air Transport Association, IATA, and the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO. And so this kind of data we needed to bring into the solution to give us information about aircraft types, the different airports and airlines. And finally, we also had some internal reference data covering flight rules, which are predefined flight plans for arriving or departing Gatwick Airport, and also some runway information. So the data integration pillar, we'll take a closer look at this. This is where we really address those data management issues that Emma talked about earlier. We retrieve the data and we organize it in a way that's easy to consume. There are two key parts to this. First of all, data storage, which is provided by Azure SQL database. And secondly, the orchestration piece, which is provided by Azure Data Factory. Going into a little bit more detail. So Azure SQL database is divided into three main areas. First of all, the landing area, just as the airport lands planes. So we need to land data. And once we've retrieved it from the various data sources, we combine it in the landing layer ready for the rest of the load. Staging holds a historical record of the source data, first of all. And then also this is where we hold the logic for improving data quality and applying our business logic. And finally, we have the presentation layer. So the model data optimized now for query performance to make self-service performant. But how do we actually make this happen? That's where Azure Data Factory comes in. So Azure Data Factory provides a tool set that forms the brains of our operation. It enables us to trigger a data load at the appropriate time. It creates the connections to the various different data sources and copies the data from them. And also it controls the steps through our pipeline, pumping the data between the landing, staging, and presentation layers. And that's where it becomes available to the reporting layer. And Emma's already talked about the data processing that she did on a regular basis and the reports that she's created. So what we wanted to do was enable her to plug that existing work into the new process and then be able to build from that and continue to develop. So there are a number of advantages to continuing to use Power BI. It's good at supporting both standard reports and dashboards that refresh on a regular basis, and also the self-service discovery aspect that Emma talked about in her investigations that she did for her boss. And the final thing that we've put in there for Emma to use is the data dictionary. There are a lot of reporting platforms around that have a great deal of terminology involved in them, and sometimes there are disagreements about the meanings of terminology between departments in the same organization, or there's just a lack of clarity. So a data dictionary can resolve these by defining terms that are used in the reporting platform and also highlighting where particular transformations have taken place to change business logic. If you've got experience of a reporting platform that could use a data dictionary, or you've got stories of where you did have overlapping terminology, or if you've implemented a data dictionary, then it'd be really good to hear about your experiences of that in the chat. One final thing about Power BI and the fact that we were making use of their existing reporting platform is that there were no new account details or passwords for anybody to learn, which is always nice. So we've had a look at the overall solution that we've built. And if you've got any questions about any of this, or you want to go into any more detail, please do put some questions in the chat and we'll come back and address them. So now we're going to take a look at how we actually delivered this solution and the project approach. Here's an overview of the delivery framework. And first, I want to look at the 3 themes that ran through the whole of the project. So collaboration, visibility, and reality checks are things that are crucial to maintain and revisit across the project. Collaboration is obviously important because a project like this is always a shared endeavour. Yes, Altis bring data and analytics expertise to the task, and ANS bring their subject matter expertise. They know what they want, they know what's going to work, they understand their business processes inside out, of course, and that means that really both parties need to be able to work together well to solve problems. And another key factor here is visibility. So when you're working on a project, you have visibility of some parts of it, but there are other stakeholders who need some high-level visibility, and that is something that needs to be made available to them on a regular basis, but also just as and when they need to see it. And finally, we need a regular reality check. We need to step back and ask ourselves, is the solution that we're building and what we've built so far, is it really going to solve the problem that we set out to solve? Is it going to deliver the functionality that we need? And also, are we progressing well with the project? How much of the resource budget have we used so far? How much it remains to be developed? Are we on track to complete? And those 3 points there are just to highlight some of the ways that you can do that. So daily calls within the project team help the collaboration process, help keep everybody in the loop. And weekly project reports provide some of that extra oversight and a regular reality check against resources. And just the communication of issues as soon as they arise on either side of the project is always helpful, because of course the earlier you know about these things, the better chance you have of finding a good solution for them within the time frame of the project. So moving on to the different phases of the project, the first thing we needed to do was gather requirements, and that began with a series of meetings with Emma. And then we moved on to some wider meetings, some stakeholder workshops, which included both the executive team and subject matter experts. And that's to help us, first of all, gauge the expectation within the business about what's needed from the project, and also to help us better understand the various business processes that we are going to be engaging with during the project itself. Data analysis is always a key part, looking at data samples and understanding the structure of the data that we have. And also, in my case, some subject area research. So aviation was a new subject area for me. So it was something that was very interesting to me and worth doing some research on to help with the context for the project. Unfortunately, for me, I was able to draw upon the aviation insight and experience that are available within the Altis team. Chris mentioned the company was formed back in 1998, and in fact, Sydney Airport were our very first customer. And we continue to work with them. And we also have other aviation clients, including Qantas and Air New Zealand. So for me, that meant that within the Altis team, there was a valuable pool of insight to draw upon at the outset of this project. So moving on to the design phase, and this was characterized by a series of deliverables that you can see there. First of all, the high-level design, which is a little bit like the outline that I showed you a few moments ago, a broad illustration of the architecture that helps us to visualize how the project fits with existing systems, and also, in this case, how we were using Azure. Secondly, a dimensional model that shows the organization of data for presentation. So, very broadly speaking, we have 2 types of data within the dimensional model. Fact data represents a business process, and it's what we're counting. So in this case, arrivals and departures. And the dimension data represents something that helps put those arrivals and departures into context. And so in this case, we have the various dimensions across the top, including airlines and aircraft. So the dimensional model maps out exactly what data we need to have and how it should be organized to meet the presentation needs of the reporting platform. And once we've got that, we can then create the source to target map, which starts from our final design and works backwards to the source system, establishing where we're going to get the data from and which transformations we need to apply to implement any business logic along the way. The key thing here is to take your draft designs and make them available to the business at the earliest opportunity. This means you can get feedback, you can develop that shared understanding across as a project team as widely as possible. And again, it means you've got time to adjust the design or communicate further if you need to. For the build itself, we chose an iterative model, again focusing back on our requirements for visibility and opportunities for collaboration. So creating a solution prototype as early as we could and making that available for feedback and discussion. It also, of course, provides a nice early road test of your overall architecture design and the functionality. So this also gave us the opportunity to incorporate a few late changing requirements, which are almost inevitable in a project of any scale. We also conducted regular unit testing, of which a little more in a moment, and I took every opportunity I could to get feedback from Emma to make sure that she knew exactly what we were building and she was able to relate that to what she needed to see. So we have three types of testing, and the aforementioned unit testing is the lowest level. You take one component of a solution that you're creating and you check that it works as it's designed. The next level up is system testing, which is an end-to-end test of your system, checking that all of the individual components interact with each other appropriately so that the whole process works as you intend it to. And then finally, where the rubber hits the road, you have user acceptance testing, which is where you unleash your solution on business users and they get to play with it and check that it does the things that they need, and also, of course, that it is performant. And the key takeaway here is that you need to maximize your chances of success in your project, and testing is an absolutely critical part of that. Another critical part of the project is documentation, and we documented first the deployment of the solution, so how you would start from scratch with your assets and put them into a new environment. We documented each of the solution components, what its purpose was and how it works. We documented the overall load process and also provided some support documentation to help with maintenance and troubleshooting and other aspects of looking after the solution once it goes live. And this is another area where, although you may have a documentation phase or task listed in your project, in reality, what you really need to do is start your documentation as early as possible and revisit it often to avoid having to create it right at the end, possibly in something of a hurry. And so for us, the last part of this was the handover to managed services. And as the project neared completion, we progressed this through meetings, the aforementioned documentation, and some Q&A sessions as well to help ensure effective knowledge transfer. And this was a key part of the project. As we've seen, the strategy for ANS was to outsource the support and management of the data platform so that they did not have to themselves develop an internal IT department to take that task on. And Altis Managed Services provides a number of capabilities, including day-to-day solution support, user support help desk, solution maintenance, which is the proactive monitoring of the solution over and above checking that the daily processes are correct, but looking further ahead to understand resource consumption and check query performance and make those little tweaks that keep the solution running smoothly. And they can also provide enhancement services to make minor changes that don't require a full project. So far this morning, we've taken a look at why a data platform was needed, what we built, and how we delivered it. So I'm now going to hand you back to Emma to share with you some of the results.
Great, thank you very much, Roger. So in this section, as I mentioned, this is something that ANS are looking to take further than just both of our units. So it's definitely going to cover our Edinburgh and Gatwick operations, but we're looking to take it further afield as well. Now, for the purpose of this demonstration, I've used example data. So you're not going to see any real life operational information in here. It's all been fabricated, but I've related the example data to the Gatwick operation so that you can see how it could be applied. So it's quite a lot to take in when you first look at it, but what we are looking at here is example EFPS data, so the flight movement information that I talked you through earlier. And this has been pulled together in a Power BI dashboard that would be pointed at the data platform. And this is one data source giving us the information that we need to assess operational performance. So we can see up here on the left-hand side, we've got the contextual information. So the number of movements broken down by departure and arrival, and the proportion of the departures that were given a new calculated takeoff time, a CTOT or CTOT. This comes from Eurocontrol, and it means that the original planned time of departure is no longer feasible. So this could be due to congestion at the destination airport, for example. It can't cope with the expected volumes later in the day, and so departing flights are delayed so that they arrive later on, spreading out the volume for the destination airport to be able to manage. And here we can see in our example data, about 25% of the departures were subject to a CTOT. And then for each departures and arrivals, it's then broken out by date and by hour. We can see the number of movements for that time period and the breakdown of their journey around the airfield. Again, relating to my earlier explanation, requesting pushback, taxiing around the airfield, and takeoff, all related to a benchmark so you can clearly see what's good performance and what's not. The same is then true for the arrival journey. Slightly less of a breakdown here, but again, showing the time from landing onto stand, and again with a benchmark to show good and poor performance. Then along the bottom, we have a breakdown of movements on the runway, So we've got AA separation, arrival, arrival, and DD separation, departure, departure. This is measuring the time between two subsequent movements on the runway of the same time. So an arrival followed by an arrival, measuring the time between the two landings, and a departure followed by a departure, measuring the time between the two takeoffs. And this is helping us to understand if we're using that strip of tarmac effectively, or is it sat there empty for minutes at a time, which is really not a good use of the asset. On the flip side, too many aircraft can create a safety issue. So the aim is to balance this to optimize efficiency and the use of the asset while maintaining a safe operation. And then tying in with this, we have a breakdown by airspace routes. So when the aircraft are departing, are they all going in the same direction? If they're all going west, again, we're increasing the risk because of the volume of aircraft in that particular area. If we're breaking this out, perhaps one west, one east, one south, we're spreading the volume of aircraft across a wider space, reducing the risk, and therefore decreasing the amount of separation required. And all of this combined helps us to understand how things are operating. So from stand, moving around the airfield, to the runway, and then into the local airspace. And you can drill down into this further to help you understand what's typical, what's expected, what's a little more unusual, perhaps some extreme values. In the top right-hand corner, you can see that we've actually gone off the chart there. So what was causing this? And it can really help you to start to be aware of problem areas that are starting to manifest themselves and whether these need intervention. So this is one perspective, but there are other ways of showing this. So if we move on to the next slide here, if we can. Again, we're using example EFPS data here, but I've applied it to a map of Gatwick Airport so that you can see where the congestion is appearing. Again, is it expected? Is it normal? Is this unusual? Why are we seeing this? So we have the contextual information top left again. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, I've brought together some information to get a feel for how much is moving at any one time, how much is calling up to request start of engines, how much is taxiing, how much is landed in this time frame, giving an idea of the complexity that the controllers are dealing with. And then we've got a great play function that we can then see how the day unfolds. The visual at the bottom then allows us to see the granular level of this information and how that maps to the visual by using the same key. So we can see in this example, the time between start request, when the pilot calls up to the controller to request engine start and pushback, and then when pushback takes place. So that helps us to understand the duration, if it's expected, if it's extreme, and where we're seeing areas of congestion or hotspots. And I'm going to go back a little bit here, because we can see in this time period, we have one corner of the airport where everyone is requesting push and start. Now the rest of the airfield is pretty empty. So why is this all happening in one corner? And does this have a knock-on effect? So if we move into the next time period, has that caused this particular extreme value here? All of this is then enabling us to dig into it much more effectively. We can drill down, we can find other information to help unpick these excessive timeframes, enabling us to understand why we're seeing extremes, reduce these values, bringing it all left in terms of this visual into the green area, seeing much greater efficiency around the airfield. So that's a short demonstration of a couple of Power BI reports that can point to data in the data warehouse. Now, if you remember before, I told you the story of when I pulled together some root cause analysis for Henry that took me a very long time. This brings me to some of the benefits that ANS have seen as a result of this solution. And actually one of which, having this map and being able to visualize the data, would have been incredibly valuable from my perspective. So very much efficiency gains is one of the primary benefits that I've seen. If I now needed to answer this question that was posed by Henry, it would take me minutes, not hours. And that improves the regular reporting and any ad hoc requests that come in as well. For any transformations I'm making on the data, I'm not waiting 10 or 15 minutes for it to load each time I create a simple measure. It's much quicker and much more straightforward. The scalability of the solution. So I mentioned earlier that the manual solutions that I'd pulled together were quite restrictive and had limited reuse. In contrast, this data can be applied in many, many ways to answer a variety of different questions. And other data sets can be added easily to drive further benefits. Each additional data source enables more value to be generated. And that could be a range of different information sources. So from other air traffic control source systems that our operational team are working with in the tower, or ground handler information, data from other air navigation service providers or airports or airlines. You might be facing the same challenges as I was facing, for example, and we've already got this data platform in place and are happy for it to be used by others to share this benefit, whether it's a specific piece of work or collaborating and looking to share data for the benefit of the wider aviation industry, which is certainly a hot topic at the moment. Improved dashboarding and reporting is something that I've seen out of this. I've got a deeper knowledge of the drivers that are impacting our performance, those within air traffic controls remit and those that sit outside, but we might be able to impact or have a conversation about. I can understand the relationships between metrics more effectively and the constraints and the enablers of performance, and how to balance these optimally for the benefit of the operation. Process improvement is another one I'd like to highlight. So streamlining those processes through automation, scheduled refreshes, for example, or automatic file saving. To implement this before in my manual processes would have been quite clunky, whereas now I've got quite nice streamlined processes in place as a result of this. And then learning is another one I'd like to highlight. So I'm certainly not a data platform expert, nor would I profess to be, but in terms of having a greater understanding of what's been provided and why and how that's benefiting, it means that I can then plan more effectively for the future to think about how this solution and capability can add more value. So it's made a real difference within ANS and to me personally in my day-to-day life. But this is just the beginning of our journey. So as we look ahead to the next steps, we're looking to take things even further. So we're working with our operational team and experts within the business and the air traffic controllers from both the Gatwick operation and Edinburgh to refine the content of these dashboards and reports to ensure that we're extracting the maximum value from the data and that we're creating a product that is both useful and meaningful for the end users, whether that's the controllers, the operations manager, the general manager of the tower, or the head of air traffic control. We're automating the connection with some of the source systems to eradicate as much manual intervention as possible, freeing up more time for the interesting stuff, so the deep dives and the analysis, and less of the routine data loading. And as I mentioned before, bringing in other data sources, so from different units, from other source systems, and wider than that. As I mentioned, this is now available to others in the aviation industry, so to see how you can overcome some of the same challenges and deliver significant value from your data as well. So that could be, as I mentioned, other ANSPs, airports, airlines, ground handlers. This all fits together and can really help you to understand your operation. So it's a really exciting journey that we're on with Altis and that we wanted to share with the wider aviation industry. And I'll now hand back to Chris for a few minutes of Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Emma and Roger. That was fascinating. We've had a few questions come in, so we'll use our last 5 minutes to tackle those. Firstly, for you, Emma, there's a question from Shane asking, can we see stand allocation performance? And you're on mute. There we go.
Yeah, thank you. So while it's not in my current dashboard, but it's certainly something that can be analysed, and I think that kind of highlights the broad application of this, and that's one area that I would like to take this into. So you will see on the map that I showed you earlier that you can start to understand where this congestion is taking place. This can then be taken further to liaise with stand planning, for example, to see if that's effective, or it might look effective on paper, but one of your flights is regularly getting a delay, for example, having a knock-on effect on other flights. So it can certainly tie in with stand allocation, and I think that's a really exciting use for this type of data.
Great. And while we're on you, Emma, there's another one come in from Ian asking, what insights and information does the dashboard provide that were not so apparent before you embarked on this journey?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things there. I think for me, the main one I would highlight is that it helps to do more than just assess performance. So while that's really critical and important to understand, it helps to dig a bit deeper into that. So comparing more metrics to understand the bigger picture. I think I've come to realize that this is like a never-ending jigsaw puzzle where there's so many different pieces that can interlink and have different relationships between them. And it's critical to understand those. So instead of compartmentalizing, I've got a bigger, better view of everything to start to understand how I can better balance those metrics for performance improvement.
Great. And Roger, there's a question here from Natalie and also one from Paul, which I'll try to combine together. Natalie asked, how did you select the architecture for the data integration platform you built as the best combination of tools for the job? And Paul's question in the chat window, did you have an existing relationship with Azure, or did you evaluate other providers like AWS, Google, Oracle Cloud as well? I think I can answer the second part very quickly. Emma, please feel free to correct me, but because ANS were already using Power BI in the Azure platform, I think it was a fairly natural choice for them to move towards Azure as the data storage and data orchestration. And I'm seeing a head nod from Emma there, so I'll pass over to Roger to talk about selecting the architecture for the data integration platform.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So Azure, or indeed any of the other cloud platforms, can seem a little bit bewildering in terms of they provide so many different ways to solve a given problem. And the way that we approached this was to list out the particular features that we needed, the types of data source we needed to connect to, what we needed to do to our data, how we wanted to store it, and then make it available for reporting. And once you've got a fairly succinct list like that, you can then look for the simplest solution that's available, which for our purposes, of course, we identified Azure Data Factory to do some of those tasks and Azure SQL Database to do others. And a couple of other things that you'd consider at the same time would be how resilient you need the solution to be. Obviously, a day-to-day data warehouse needs something a little bit different to, for example, a real-time analytics solution that's looking at data streaming in constantly. Also, how mission critical your system is would come into that. And you also need to think about scalability and adaptability. There's some other things when making your choice. So it's sort of about taking those principles and applying it to the specific circumstances, I think.
Great, thanks, Roger. Another one for you, Emma, has come in. Can this solution be applied to area and approach sectors?
Yeah, certainly. I think, again, depends on the data that you've got, but if you've got the information there, I think some of the same concepts can be applied. So again, you're looking to avoid areas of congestion or times when you've got a too high a workload for the controllers to deal with in that sector or that area. And so you're again looking to, I guess, spread that to balance the workload so you don't have to put on any flow restrictions, for example. So it certainly can be, it's the same application of concept if the data is available. So yeah, definitely.
Great. And while we've got you, Emma, Cameron asks, are you getting much traction from others, such as airlines, airports, handling agents, benefiting from the platform, or do sensitivities such as performance or commercial get in the way?
That's a good question. I think that's always going to be a bit of a tough balance, and that's some of the challenges in trying to, I guess, combine data, and it's only when we share that information that we can really drive the benefits across the wider industry. But there's certainly collaboration that we're seeing from others. So being able to bring in airport data, for example, and I've been working with some of the airlines on the Gatwick operation, for example, been able to receive some of their information. So there's definitely the collaboration there and people coming together because they understand the benefit that this can drive. And there are always ways around this. You could put things in place if you were conscious of the commercials of it. But I agree that there will always be a challenge, but we're certainly starting to break through some of that, which is very exciting.
Great. And we're continuing to get a number of questions through, but I'm conscious of time, so we'll make this the last one. This is one for you, Roger. How did using the Azure cloud change the way the project was delivered compared to delivering it via traditional on-premise data platform?
Right, yeah. So the key thing with that is you don't have to worry to such a degree about the hardware. You have no hardware procurement or no legacy servers or resources or software versions creating sort of artificial barriers or constraints on the work. So you kind of have a blank canvas, which is nice. It was also a lot faster to deploy resources. Not having that procurement process just means that you can try out different hardware configurations if you want to. You can resource your solution the way you think it needs to be resourced, and if you've got that wrong, guess what? You can change it, and it's not a big deal. So because of that, you spend less time trying to predict your capacity that you need, and more time actually experimenting and testing to find out, in fact, what your capacity needs really are. And that's a much better place to be. You also have some other benefits, like you've got pre-configured recovery operations with data backed up to a second data center, for instance, and that sort of thing can be all out of the box. And you can still tweak it to meet specific requirements, but it's nice to have a template laid out there without having to design something from a blank page. And also the transition, I think, to managed services was a lot more straightforward. Remember that for ANS, the strategy here was that they don't want a big IT infrastructure department. And if they were creating something like this sort of 15, 20 years ago, then they wouldn't have had a great deal of choice in terms of they would have had to go to somewhere local, or they would have had to build this solution on-prem themselves and recruit people to look after it. So that strategy is made very much easier by going to the cloud.
Great, thanks, Roger. Well, big thank you to our panelists, Emma and Roger, for a fantastic presentation today. Thank you for everyone for attending and asking interesting questions and being engaged. There was lots of chat throughout, and Roger and Emma, you'll be delighted to see there was lots of positive comments. Very appreciative of your visualizations, and lots of support for the notion of having senior level sponsorship engaged throughout the project. Sorry to those questions we didn't get to answer. Please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll pop my email address, and so will Roger and Emma, in the chat window now. Please do feel free to get in touch with us. And one thing I would like to also offer is to attendees of the webinar, and I'm going to be sending a recording of the webinar to attend to those that are registered as well. But please do share the webinar recording with others, and I make the offer to you all that we have some upcoming Power BI dashboard in a day courses that we're running for free, and so I invite you to take advantage of that, and I'll offer 2 free places on that Power BI dashboard in a day training to each of the organizations on the call today. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, please feel free to get in touch with me, and I would very much welcome the opportunity to speak to you and your stakeholders about how we might be able to help you. And Chris K at altisglobal.co.uk, there's my email address. Thanks again, everybody, and have a fantastic day.